Hey everybody, this is Matthew Doyle. We're going to show you a quick tutorial today on how to do a cloaking effect inside of Unreal Engine with a complex object. Now in this case, we're going to be using a simple coffee cup mug that has an interior and an exterior. Now this request comes from a user on LinkedIn, a follower of mine, and they're trying to create an effect where you're basically able to cloak the outside of an object while the inside stays visible, and the outside actually occludes the inside, so you don't see the back faces of the inside, the interior of the object. And so we're going to go into Unreal and achieve that with a material effect. And before we do that, we need to do some basic setup inside of 3ds Max or whatever tool you're using, as well as Photoshop. So let's go ahead and jump right into the project, and we'll see how it's achieved. It's pretty simple. So we're going to go ahead and go into 3ds Max here now. And you can see here my coffee cup that I'm using. I downloaded from TurboSquid. And you can see there's my interior part and my exterior. And so we want it to be in such a way that this outside is invisible, but the inside is visible no matter which way you rotate it. All right, so let's go ahead and look at what we need to do here inside of Max. And the first thing we'll need to do is to set up our UVs so that we can create an alpha texture. The alpha texture will determine what parts are hidden and what parts are visible in conjunction with some other material effects. In this case, we're going to use a custom depth pass. So first of all, we'll go ahead and select our cup, and we'll go to our modifier list, and we'll add an unwrap UV modifier, and then we can open the editor. All right, so in the editor here, you can see the UV shells for this object are not particularly well laid out, so we're going to fix that first. Go ahead and select our shells, go to Tools, and then we want Repack UVs. And I'm going to leave it all at the default. Hit OK. There we go. That looks a lot better. All right, so now we need to figure out which of these shells are the inside of the mug and which are the outside. I already know this shell and this shell. Those are going to be my inside. So I'll double-click both of those. And you can see now in our viewport here, there's our inside shells selected. So those are the ones we want to be white in our alpha mask. And then the rest of them can be black. So this looks good. That's all we really need to do in here. Now we just need to export this as a guide that we can use inside of Photoshop for working on our texture. So we'll go to Tools again, and then we'll use Render UV Template. And these default settings will need to be tweaked. Obviously, width and height, it's whatever. I'm going to leave it at 1K. That's fine. I can turn off Force Two-Sided. I want to fill with white, so that way it's fully opaque. And it will change mode to solid, so we want to fill them in solid completely. We can turn off show overlap. Our edges, we'll go ahead and uncheck visible edges and visible seams, and then we'll render out to a PNG file, and we want grayscale 16-bit, and then hit render UV template. Okay, and here you can see our UVs rendered out, and again we have basically black for the explanation of an alpha mask. Black will not render and white will render, but we don't want the whole thing to be rendered out. We don't want everything to be white, so we're going to need to go into Photoshop now and tweak this a little bit. So let's do that. Okay, now here we are inside of Photoshop with our alpha texture. Again, we know that this is the interior and this is the interior, so what we can do is use our magic wand tool, and then we'll select each of these pieces that are the exterior and simply delete them. All right, and that's all we really need to do here. We can resave our file, and now we're ready to go into Unreal. Okay, so here inside of Unreal, I've already created the object, and I have it rendering the way that I'd like it to render, where we have the inside fully rendered and the outside occluded. And I'm going to show you now how to achieve that. We're going to make another copy of this object and recreate the material effects. Now, of course, the first step would be to import your objects. You'll need to import the static mesh of the mug, which you should have exported from 3ds Max as an FBX file. And you'll also need to import the alpha PNG texture that we just created. So here inside of my meshes folder, I've got the static mesh of the mug, and you can see what it looks like when you just have a very basic material applied to it and you're trying to hide the outside with an alpha channel. It still renders the inside, so the inside is not being occluded. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a custom depth pass, which is a render target that is handled by the video card in what's called the G buffer. And this is Unreal renders out these passes that it then sends to the video card, and the video card is able to put them all back together to create the final image. Well, we're going to use a special one called a custom depth buffer that will allow us to hide parts of this object so that we don't see the inside, despite the fact that the outside is invisible. So in order to do that, we're going to need to create a blueprint object. So we'll go under blueprints here, and we're going to create a new blueprint class, and this is going to be an actor, and we'll call it BP_cup02. All right, let's go ahead and go into our blueprint. So the first thing we need to do is add our cup inside of our blueprint here. But what we need to do is we need 2 copies of the cup. So one copy is going to be used just for the depth pass. The other copy will be used to render the polygons that we want to be visible. Now, while this might seem excessive, it's basically the technique you'll need to use when you want to achieve an effect like this. And it has to do with the fact that creating transparency by a video card and determining the order of that transparency, which objects are drawn on top of others, can be very difficult to achieve without using something like this technique. Now, as far as extra polygons, because yes, you're doubling up on your poly count for your object, that shouldn't be a problem for fill rate because one of them will not be rendered in the main render pass. One of them will just be used for the depth pass. So let's go ahead and add our coffee mug now to our blueprint here. So we'll need to go to our meshes folder, and we're going to just drag in 2 copies. There we go. All right, and we can pretty much leave the hierarchy the way it is, but let's go ahead and rename these. So I'm going to rename this first one. We'll call this one depth. And then the second one we can rename to render. You don't have to rename these, just keep in mind I like to work in an organized fashion. Okay, so let's go ahead and hide our default scene root, and let's uncheck visible here. All right, now the idea is that both of these mugs should be sitting at exactly the same location. So with depth selected, we just need to come over to our details panel and then scroll down to the rendering section. And then if the advanced options aren't open, make sure that they are open. And we're going to uncheck visible in ray tracing, visible in reflection capture, visible in a render in main pass, and render in depth pass, and receive decals. So we don't need any of that for this, but what we do want is render custom depth pass. So let's go ahead and check that. Now, before you can use this, we're going to need to make sure our project settings are enabled for rendering our custom depth pass. So let's do that real quick. We can go ahead and close this window. To set up our project settings, we'll need to go to Settings, Project Settings, and then from here, just do a quick search for Depth. Then we can look down under Engine Rendering, and you should see Custom Depth Stencil Pass. Now, by default, this might be enabled, and if it is, then you should be fine. Mine's set to enabled with stencil, so I could actually use a stencil buffer as well, but we can just go ahead and set this to enabled, and that should be all we need to do. Now, in case you're wondering what these buffers look like, we can do a quick debug by going up to our View Mode Options button here, and then going down to Buffer Visualizations. And here we have all the different render passes. So we have base color, opacity, metallic, roughness, specular, you name it. And the one we're going to be using is custom depth. So if I select that, you can see now that everything around the cup is black while the cup itself has a grayish tone to it. And this tone will change based on the distance. So if you're really far away, it'll get much closer towards white. You can see that it's getting much lighter, the gray tone there. And then when you're closer, it gets darker. And this is because this cup is set to use the custom depth pass the way we just did inside of our blueprint. So that is what the custom depth pass is. It's basically a render buffer that allows you to see how far into the scene an object is. And we're going to use that to help occlude the outside, or rather to hide the outside and occlude the inside. You can kind of tell that the inside has a slightly different tone to it than the outside. All right, so let's jump back over to our blueprint, open that back up, and just to really kind of drive the point home here, if I select the render object now, and we zoom in on it. Oop, going a little too fast there. And then we go down to rendering as well. In our rendering options, we want to make sure that render in main pass is still checked for this object, but we don't need its custom depth pass. All right, so render in main pass, this is the object that will render. Okay, so we have our two cups there, and the other thing we need to do is we need to apply our materials to each object. So for this depth pass object, all we're going to use is a simple opaque material. So let's go ahead and create our materials now. So we'll go to our materials folder here. And I have my materials already created for the original cup. So let's go ahead and just duplicate these materials for the new one. I'm going to right click and then create a material. And we'll call this one M_opaque 02. And then we'll open that up. In here, all we really need to do is apply a base color. So I'm using a vector 3. That's holding down the 3 key and clicking. And we'll just connect that to base color, and then we'll just leave it black in this case, and then we can save that. Okay, now we need to apply that material to our depth pass model here. So we'll go to our details panel in the static mesh editor. We'll go to element 0, and we're going to apply that material. So that was M_opaque 02. Now for our render cup, we're going to need to create the material that takes advantage of this custom depth pass as well as our alpha mask. So let's go ahead and do that now. So once again, we'll need a new material, and we'll call this one M_cup 02. And we can open that up. Okay, so the first thing we want to do with this material is we want to go to the details panel and change the blend mode from opaque to translucent. Then we're going to scroll down to the translucent rollout, and we're going to make sure that the lighting mode is translucency volume, so surface translucency volume. That's going to give us a higher quality translucency effect. Now we can also set this material up to make use of custom depth passes, and we'll do that with allow custom depth rights. So we'll go ahead and check that. Again, that's found under translucency. Okay, so let's go ahead and build our material here. The first thing we're going to do is add base color again. So we'll add another vector 3. So hold the 3 key down, attach that, and let's go ahead and make this look something like a coffee mug. Okay. Of course, you could use a texture here or something a little more detailed. And the only other input we need on this material is going to be our opacity input. This will be where we basically connect up our depth pass information as well as the camera facing. We need to know where the camera is in relation to the object, and then our alpha texture will be added to that effect or multiplied to create the overall image. Let's go ahead and save that and see our progress now real quick. So let's reload our blueprint object here and select our render mug, and we need to apply our material M_cup 02. And let's go ahead and drag it into the scene now. Let's go back to lit mode here. And we'll drag our blueprint object into the scene. So you can see the current results of the mug here clearly, not exactly what we're going for. And we're occluding the front part of the mug, but the rest of the mug is still being rendered. And that's not exactly what we're trying to achieve here. So we're going to need to do a few more tweaks to our material. So let's go ahead and do that now. We'll jump back over to our material and do the rest of that. So the simple naive approach would be simply to add our texture sample here. So let's go ahead and hold the T key to create our texture sample, and then we need to search for our cup alpha, and let's set that. And then we could just simply take the red channel of this, because remember, it's an alpha mask. You only really need to use the red channel, plug that into opacity, and then we'll, of course, need to save that. Back in our map here, we can now see that we are, in fact, hiding the outside of the mug, but because we're not using our depth information yet or the camera facing, we're actually still rendering the inside of the mug. So we need to occlude the parts of the mug on the inside that are hidden by the outside, even though the outside is now invisible. Okay, so this is where we're going to use our custom depth information. So let's go ahead and set that up. For that, we're going to need to access it using what's called a scene texture node. For that, we'll right-click and type scene texture. And then with the scene texture node selected under details, we'll use this drop down here to choose custom depth, which is right about in the middle here, right above post-process input 0. Okay, so other than the depth information, which we looked at that earlier, we're going to need the camera position. And for the camera position, we're going to need to get the absolute world position of the object as well as the camera position. So we'll again right click and do a search for world position. This is going to give us the absolute world position of our object. And then again, we'll right click and search for camera position. Okay, so there's our world space camera position. And what we need to do is subtract the camera's position from the position of the object. So we'll go ahead and pull off of the object's output pin here and search for subtract. And then we'll plug the camera's position into the B input of our subtract. And then what we need to do is we basically need to transform the vector that we get from this. We want to transform from world space to view space. So view space is, basically what you see. So we'll go ahead and pull off of our output here, and we'll do a search for transform. And that gives us our transform vector. And we'll change the drop downs here from tangent space to world space for the source, and the destination from world space to view space. Now we're only going to need the B input, which is the second part of our vector here. So let's do a quick mask, component mask, and we'll uncheck red and green, and we'll keep blue. I said second position, I meant to say third. So RGB corresponds to a vector 3, and so the B or blue input or output would be the third position of that vector 3. So we only need the Z, right? So it's X, Y, and Z would be pointing towards us or into the camera, into the world. So that's all we need in this case. Let's go ahead and move some of this over a little bit. So from here, we're going to actually need to use some custom HLSL code. So remember, all of the stuff in here is basically just HLSL code and turned into a visual node system. But sometimes we don't have built-in nodes to do specific things. So we're going to use some custom HLSL code. And for that, we do have a custom node. We'll right-click and search for custom. And then in here, we need to create our code and then create our inputs and our outputs that we can use. Let's go ahead and do our inputs and outputs first. We're going to need, in this case, 3 inputs. So over here in the details panel, we've got, so far we only have 1 input. So let's hit the plus button here next to inputs and add 2 more. And this first input, we'll go ahead and name it custom depth. And then our second input, we'll open it up and then we'll name it current depth. And then our third input we're going to use to kind of tweak things, and we're going to name that depth bias. And this will be applied inside of a material instance that we can easily tweak to modify how this effect how strong the effect is, essentially. Okay, so we're going to plug into custom depth. Obviously, we're going to plug our custom depth scene texture into that. So just FYI, a scene texture grabs the entire scene that you can see on the viewport as a texture, right? And then it gives us whatever pass, whatever depth, depth pass or opacity or metallic. It gives us that information that we can then use as a texture in something else. Okay, so that's our custom depth pass. And then for our current depth, we're going to use the output here from our calculation to get the vector from our camera and object's position in world space. And then for our third input, we're going to just create a scalar value here, plug that in, and we'll convert this to a parameter, and we'll call this depth bias. And this is where we'll be able to play with the value. Let's go ahead and set the default to a value of 1. And then from here, we'll need to take what we get out of this and connect it up with our alpha mask. But let's just go ahead and do this without the alpha mask. So let's plug that into opacity for now. And now we need to actually add the code that we'll be using. Okay, so the code is actually quite simple. In this case, we're going to select, with our node selected, we'll click on code here. And we're just going to type in essentially a very simple little formula. And it's going to be current depth. That's the name of our variable, current depth, minus current depth times depth bias. And then we're going to do less than or equal to custom depth. So this is going to use the custom depth and the current depth and determine which one is to be rendered on top of the other based on which one, whether or not current depth is less than or equal to custom depth. Okay? And as long as we don't have any typos there, that should be correct. And now we can save this. And back inside of our editor, let's go ahead and create a material instance. We'll right click there, create material instance, and we'll call this mi_cup02. And now we can go into our blueprint. Let's just go ahead and edit the blueprint. And with our render object selected, we want to change our element material, element 0 material, to our material instance. So that's going to be mi_cup02. All right, so far we don't really see any difference here. So let's go ahead and load up our material instance. And let's enable our depth bias, and let's play with that value here. So you can see as I adjust it, so as I go lower here, it's obviously rendering more of the outside. So if we set it all the way to 0, that makes the object completely invisible. If we set it to something like 0.01, the object is completely visible. And as we get closer to 1, it renders less and less of the front-facing part of the outside. But that's not exactly what we want still. What we need is to only show the inside, and that's where our alpha texture comes in. But we do have control now over the depth part of the rendering process. So let's go back to our main material, and here is where we need to use our alpha texture. So we're going to multiply these two together and plug those into our opacity. So pulling off of our custom depth information here, we'll do our quick multiply, and then from our alpha texture, we'll plug that into B, plug that into opacity, and then save. Okay, so let's check it out now. Let's go ahead, and you can see clearly the cup is looking a little different. Let's go ahead and adjust our material instance again. Okay, so let's go ahead and bring this down a little lower, and you can see what's happening now. As I bring this value down closer to 0, we are now starting to hide everything but the inside. Now, if I go all the way to 0, that's going to hide the inside as well. So you want to get as close to 0 as you possibly can. I'm going to put in like a value of 0.01 here. And so we can see clearly we get the effect that we're going for. Now, this is based on depth information. So as you move the camera, it's going to affect the material effect here. So if I get really far away, so let's go ahead and get as far away as we possibly can. You may start to see, let's not select, you can see, there we go. As we get further away, it starts to render in the rest of the mug, right? So in order to, it really depends on how far you want to be able to get away from the object, but we can increase this effect even further out by simply reducing this value even further. Let's take it down to 0.001 now. And now, even this far away, we're not seeing anything but the inside. Okay, and then as we get closer and closer, it doesn't change, right? So we're good here. This is exactly what we're going for. Okay, so that is basically how you achieve this effect, where you can cloak the outside of an object while the inside is still rendered, but occluded by the outside as well. You can still see the shadow here, and that shows you that there is a full coffee mug. Obviously, it's not a trick. It's still there. All right, so that's going to do it for this short tutorial today. I enjoyed putting it together for you guys. I hope you were able to figure out the effect you were going for by this information, and to see the power of using something like a custom depth buffer, as well as other buffers, other render buffers that you can use inside of Unreal. All right, so thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.